podcast is brought to you by the Association for Coaching, one of the world's leading international professional bodies, which is advancing coaching in business and society worldwide. My name is Kate Jenkinson, and I am your host for this wonderful 8-part series, Neurodiversity in the Workplace, where, along with my guests, we explore the rapidly developing landscape that is neurodiversity in work. My guests are industry leaders, coaches, and business founders who share their passion, knowledge, and the real-life situations and scenarios from their own practical lived experience. Together, we examine the complexity of the workplace for those who experience the world differently. Whether you're a business owner, leader, coach, or trainer, these conversations highlight how you can make a difference to everyone's working world by looking at life through a neurodivergent lens. I am delighted to have Mark Crawley, the founder of Diversita, here with me today. And we're going to talk about the experience you have of establishing your own business, Mark, and also because of what you do in your own business. So would you be able to introduce yourself to our listeners and tell us the origin story of Diversita, perhaps?
Definitely. And Kate, thanks so much for the invite today.
Pleasure.
I'm really looking forward to the conversation as well.
Me too.
So the origin, wow. When I always tell people about Diversita, I never want to sound too idealistic, but ultimately we started 3 years ago as an organisation, and ultimately what we do as a company is we're a neurodiversity consultancy that help organisations become more neuro-inclusive, and we do that through recruitment, training, awareness, all of these other things. I suppose the reason we started, and again, not trying to sound too preachy, was that I worked in recruitment for a long time and I could see day-to-day challenges with recruitment processes for most individuals. But then when I started looking at my son, my youngest son is autistic, was diagnosed when he was 3. He was 14 at the time. And I was thinking, well, what's this going to look like when he starts going to work? What's this going to look like when he starts having interviews and wants to enter the workforce? And it just seemed prohibitive. It really did.
Yeah.
I managed really big teams in recruitment. Very rarely did any of the people who work for me or recruitment consultants come to me and say, I've had someone disclose or tell me they're neurodivergent. I very rarely had conversations with organisations around neuro-inclusivity or anything like that. And then when we started looking at the data and the statistics, and it's around 17 to 20% of the UK are neurodivergent, It just felt like a really missed opportunity. And so it was a couple of things. It was an area that I had expertise in from a recruitment perspective in particular. And then it was a case of, you know what, we're trying to pave the way for the neurodiversity community, in particular myself.
And it has much more meaning, doesn't it, when you know that you could make a difference for someone who's close to you, but also others who are in that same situation. And I suppose what I'm interested in is, were you not seeing people who are neurodivergent coming through recruitment, or were they hiding it? What was happening at that stage?
I suppose there's two answers to that. In terms of the job applicants coming through that we would represent as a recruitment agency, I can count on one hand in probably 17 years at that point in recruitment, any candidate that disclosed they were dyslexic, autistic, ADHD to us.
Wow.
In terms of people that worked for me, actually recruitment consultants themselves, we had a few individuals, but it was more of a case of, because they knew my story, they felt a little bit more comfortable to disclose. But again, very, very few, certainly not 20% of the workforce anyway.
No.
In terms of individuals actually saying that I would like reasonable adjustments for this interview, or I'd love a different platform to try and showcase my skills, barely any, if any, certainly none from memory.
And that's assuming that you were offering to make reasonable adjustments if people asked for it, so that they were aware they could. They just chose not to?
I think, again, this is part of the challenge.
Okay.
Recruitment agencies, to me, are one of the biggest blind spots, because the way we used to be set up was to send a representation of job seekers to organisations for consideration. But very rarely would we target around a diverse range of applicants, maybe a little bit about gender, but certainly not from a neuro-inclusivity perspective. And of course, the recruitment consultants that are talking to job applicants every day, they're not trained on neuro-inclusion. They may never have met a neurodivergent individual or understand what autism is, or they certainly didn't understand anything about reasonable adjustments, and trying to then push back on the organisations to say, look, can you give someone a little bit more time or questions in advance, etc. So it always felt like a bit of an institutional or systemic issue at that point. So when we launched Diversita, we wanted to make sure we represented job seekers, but equally so, we wanted to make sure we trained and educated organisations. And that twofold approach is something that no other real recruitment agency or organisation are really doing.
You've always stood out to me when I've been on LinkedIn and looking for people talking about neurodiversity and neuro-inclusion. That always stood out to me in your messaging. How does that sit with the idea of being inclusive? Sometimes saying that you're there representing a certain area in itself is sometimes seen as not inclusive. So do you see what I mean? And how does that balance?
I think it's, if we're looking at the destination being universal design or everyone being given a fair opportunity or equitable platforms to succeed, that's the destination, of course, everyone wants to get to, but we're on this journey. And I always use this phrase, neuro-inclusion, in my opinion, particularly in recruitment, it almost needs like an adrenaline shot of focus from companies. And I don't think it's being discriminatory or alienating anyone else. It just means that you're trying to understand how to give people a platform to showcase skills that normally wouldn't have this platform. You look at the data right in the UK, and what is it, between 69 and 71% of autistic adults are unemployed. That's not any one issue, but there's no doubt in my mind that recruitment or prohibitive processes or the decision-making process about who's hired is one of those issues. So I think companies focus on this will, if anything else, widen their candidate pool, right? And that's the idea going forward, right?
Yeah.
To try and have a better representation of job seekers coming through.
And is that appealing to organisations? Are they interested in widening that talent pool and getting that diversity? Or are they a little bit anxious about what that might mean for them? What's the response like?
There's a couple of points here with that. If I'm going to be really honest, Kate, a lot of companies will look at this either now or in the future from a pain perspective. And what I mean by that is that they will start to look for particular roles or particular jobs within their organisation and they can't find people. So we always say to companies, the opportunity there is the untapped talent pool that's out there that you're not attracting at the moment. You've got a huge amount of individuals there who are not applying for your roles for a variety of issues. And we'll obviously probably get onto those a bit later in the call. So we try to make sure our organisations understand that this is really good for their business. It's not just a nice thing to do. It is really, really good for their business.
Yeah.
The other key point around this is trying to get organisations to really understand the strengths that neurodivergent individuals can bring to their organisations and moving away from this ableist idea or patronising idea of we just need to give someone who's disabled or neurodivergent a job. There's so many skills out there that will add value. And part of the education process with organisations when they are a little bit on the fence or a little bit unsure about how to progress is looking at it through that lens and saying, look, there are a lot of challenges being neurodivergent, but there's also some enormous strengths if people are given a platform and the opportunity to showcase those strengths. And that's part of the awareness piece.
And do you find that it takes certain kind of examples or messages to convince people of this, organisations and internal hiring managers of this? What helps them understand it best?
I suppose it depends who you're talking to, right? So if you look at a larger organisation, there's various teams of people that you will talk to, right? You'll talk to people in equity, diversity and inclusion, you talk to people in HR, you talk to people in the business, you talk to people in learning and development, all of these key areas. And so it depends who the audience is, I would suggest there, about how that message comes across. The universal message across this, though, is trying to showcase any examples you do have, or trying to show that the post-COVID, the unemployment statistics, particularly for autistic individuals, has improved by 10%, right? And a lot of that is to do with hybrid working and these type of statistics, right? So you do have to showcase these areas. However, the ROI, or return on investment, is key. It really is. It is. And I think this is where a lot of the challenges are with organisations that work in neuro-inclusion, is they're a little bit fearful of talking about the business impact or the return on investment opportunities for companies, when in reality, that's the language a lot of organisations speak.
Exactly. Why are people fearful of that?
I suppose people are thinking this is a community that should just be supported unconditionally and regardless. And of course they should be, like anyone else who looks for your opportunities. But there's a little bit of a mindset still about it. It's almost like a supported internship still, or a supported role, rather than thinking, you know what? It might be that this job seeker just needs to travel off peak in the mornings. It might be that this job seeker prefers bullet point communication rather than a long, massive sentence in an email. These minor adjustments can make people feel a little more supported. It might be that in a recruitment process, you do have your camera off for the first interview, or these type of things that can make people feel a little bit more that they can feel that sense of belonging and support. And I just think there's a bit of a, I suppose, not an uncomfortable truth around it, but a lot of organisations just don't know enough around this. And it can be quite a complex subject, particularly when a lot of organisations have obviously been looking, and quite rightly so, a lot of other diversity pillars for the last few years.
It's relatively new. Even though neurodiversity has been a truth for a very long time, I think we're only developing language that helps people understand it. Like you say, this need to talk about business impact or adjusting the environment in some way. I'm interested to know of any placements or success stories that especially stand out for you, Mark.
There's two that stand out for me when I was thinking about this before the call. There's a candidate we placed at a large insurance provider. And what I loved about this is, first of all, we were lucky enough to be featured in the Independent newspaper.
Brilliant.
Where they showcased this experience. But what was great about this is that what we had was an organisation that wasn't particularly neuro-inclusive, but you had a neuro-inclusive team in there. Right, you had a team that really were looking to do some great work. You had a neurodivergent manager who almost circumvented the regular recruitment process to give an experience where they felt it was going to be far more inclusive, particularly in this case for someone who was ADHD dyspraxic. And it was fantastic. It really was, because the individual had the opportunity to showcase their skills, got the role, but then immediately felt supported because, and this is really key, they were comfortable disclosing at application stage. They were comfortable disclosing because they obviously speaking to an organisation that only focuses and works with neurodivergent job seekers. And they were comfortable because they were interviewing with a manager that really understood neurodiversity. What happened then, though, Kate, was even better, because once they started, you could then move all of these sense of openness and adjustments, etc., into their onboarding process. And it was seamless. And they're still there now. Well, it was 2 years ago, and they're absolutely flourishing. So that always stands out. It really, really does.
You've said it a couple of times now, and I want to highlight this because you've talked about showcasing their skills. And to you and me, having worked in HR most of my career, the ability to let somebody showcase their skills seems like a natural thing to want to have happen during recruitment. But it doesn't often, does it? The other processes are not necessarily skills-based. So how do you help neurodivergent people showcase their skills?
This is one of the key points, and I'm so glad you brought it up, because when we do training for companies and recruitment teams, we want to make sure that everything they're doing, from the job specification to the interview process to the decision-making part, is about the skills themselves, not subjective requirements, not is this person going to be a good team fit, not are they going to be able to go out for a beer on a Thursday night or anything like this. Is about looking at skills and have they got the skills to do this job, and have they got skills better than another candidate to do this job. And showcasing those is about making sure that you provide equity, and we'll talk about equity I'm sure a lot through this, into the experience. So people will always say, why do you give questions in advance? Or why should someone have questions in advance? It's cheating, it's giving people a heads up.
Well, exactly, that's the criticism. I don't agree with it, but you're absolutely right. I challenge a lot of hiring managers around this idea it's cheating.
Absolutely.
So how would you answer that?
Well, this is it. It's not cheating. And there's two parts. First of all, let's be honest, right? Let's just demystify the type of questions that are going to be asked in these interviews. They're pretty generic. They're normally just competency-based questions. And there's nothing nothing stopping, like we're doing on the webinar today, exploring the question a little bit more if you want a little bit more detail, right? So let's give people the platform. The other thing is that uncertainty can cause so much anxiety for a lot of our community, particularly autistic job seekers. So from the journey to the office to who I'm going to ask for the first time, is it going to be a room that's no natural light in? Is there going to be 10 people in that room? Is this person going to try to give me a handshake or a hug? All of these other things can cause a lot of challenges. So just trying to give a little bit of assistance by giving someone the opportunity to prepare gives that equitable platform for someone to showcase their skills a bit more. And this is what we're trying to do. All we're trying to do is give someone the right platform to have the same opportunity to demonstrate their skills as every other candidate who comes through that door. And I think that's the key answer around it.
You've just really clearly articulated the many, many things that somebody who has a different way of thinking or being would find challenging. All of those unknowns when they are coming into that interview space, so that they aren't set up for success usually. And that little bit of assurance that these are the questions that will be asked and in this order, because that is also useful, just helps them and helps everyone else. Thank you for taking us through all of those steps. You said you had 2 examples that you wanted to showcase of success stories, and I went off down the tangent of one of them and asked you to talk about showcasing skills. What was the other one you wanted to share, Mark?
The other one I really like is we work with a company that they work in the private equity world, which can be quite, for want of a better phrase, dog eat dog, right? Very, very money focused.
I would say shark infested, but yeah.
Pretty much, right? You're absolutely right. But however, they are easily, and I've worked with about over 100 organizations now, easily in certain pockets, one of the most neuro-inclusive organizations I've worked with.
Wow.
They have outstanding offices in terms of creating environments for people that want to go to the office, in terms of quiet spaces, appreciation of space, technology to help support people. Part of their private healthcare started doing private diagnosis for your neurotype. So there's some fantastic work going on there. They raise so much awareness, and they have Slack channels. They have an employee resource group that focuses purely on neurodiversity. They do so much great work. They're looking at recruitment processes at the moment, internal documentation. It's just incredible. And they have so many senior sponsors. And this is another key part. The organizations that are succeeding or making an impact is because they have senior level involvement in those organizations. It shouldn't be someone who's sitting there just thinks, do you know what, I'm going to try and change things internally. That's brilliant if they do, but they need support from senior leadership of an organizations. And this company does that brilliantly. So again, I just wanted to highlight that one because, again, finance, like you mentioned, a little bit shark infested, etc., probably not the best reputation, right? All money driven, but they're doing some great work.
And they're positioned to do that from the sound of it, because they've got the resources to be able to invest in those areas. I heard you talk about technology and private diagnosis. Not everyone can do those things. It's amazing that this organisation is. What would you say are some of the strategies that an organisation that maybe is budget restricted, what might they be able to do that doesn't cost so much?
It's a good question. I always try and use examples, right? So there's a company you probably know called Genius Within.
Yeah.
And they've got a tool. And I've not used it, but I was talking to Fiona who works there, called Genius Finder, where you put in information, and what it ultimately does is, as a neurodivergent individual, it gives you recommendations for reasonable adjustments you might ask for. And I believe they said out of the 250 adjustment requests, I think it's around 230 of them are free, right? They're not technology focused. They're process change, they're mindset change, communication differences, all of these other great areas. So ultimately, with a lot of organizations, it is about just a different mindset, particularly from managers and people leaders and recruitment teams. It is about just trying to make sure that you try to embrace different ways of communicating or different ways of working or different ways of looking at projects, etc. It's more about that than it is often around technology. However, that said, in the UK, we have access to work, quite little wrongly. It's a bit hit and miss, and it's quite challenging at the moment in terms of timeframes. But smaller businesses, if a neurodivergent employee applies for some support via access to work, can get quite a lot of financial support to make those implementations and recommendations. So there's not a lot of excuses around the cost of implementing changes or processes or technology a lot of the time. Of course, there may be some cost associated with that, but again, we would argue that retaining someone, giving someone the opportunity to be more productive, that return on investment based around that is money well spent.
It was always something. Before some of the language around neurodiversity, and there was the language there around disability, is that when you've made that, I wouldn't say even extra effort, but when you've taken the time to consider those differences and you've adapted your approach to include people, the retention and engagement that you get from people who haven't had that so much in their career is extraordinary. People stay with you because they feel connected and they feel seen and heard. But it doesn't have to cost a lot to get a lot back in return.
Absolutely.
So why do so many workplaces struggle to attract or retain neurodivergent talent?
Attraction is probably no one answer.
Okay.
But I can paint a picture.
That would be nice, yeah.
And I always try and represent the voices of the neurodivergent community. But a lot of our job seekers will come to us and say, I didn't disclose at this organisation. And I'll explore why. Why did you not disclose when you applied? Why did you not apply? Well, I looked at the website and the application process was ridiculously long. And then I looked at it and there was no opportunity for me to disclose. If there was a tick box to say I'm either disabled or I'm not, but there wasn't really any other information I could put in.
Wow.
That's stage one. Then I looked at the job specification and it was, this is a high pressure job where you're going to be challenged within an inch of your sanity or whatever it is.
Yeah, that's the phrase.
Yeah, I mean, or we need you to be very flexible around business needs and we only want the best people.
Dynamic.
Exactly. Dynamic.
Go-getting.
Go-getting. It's like you're recruiting for the Marines, right? But ultimately, it's so subjective, all of this, that a lot of individuals, particularly, as I say, our autistic job seekers, will look at that. I think I'm not going to apply here. Right? There's no opportunity to disclose. I've looked at the job specification and it's really not speaking to me. There's a lot of things here I don't understand. There's a lot of skills here I don't have. There's a lot of things here that make me quite fearful or paint a picture of the environment. So I'm not going to apply. So straight away, you've got a job seeker that just based around a few key changes has not applied for that role.
Yeah.
Now, the reason a lot of individuals don't stay at organisations, in my opinion, particularly if they haven't disclosed, is because they don't feel safe to do so. They go into an environment and they've gone through the recruitment process and not disclosed because of biases or risk of not getting the role, etc. Get into the environment. Straight away, they may have a manager or colleagues who are not really talking openly around neuro-inclusion or neurodiversity, or they've seen a few examples internally of other people that haven't been given flexibility or any type of support or told to just get on with it or anything like that. So it starts to paint a picture there. And this is fully supported by the employment statistics, but it's also really supported by, there's a couple of reports that show that organisations have got very little idea about how many neurodivergent individuals work there and in their organisations. And that's because people don't feel safe to disclose. They don't. So it's a combination of things on both sides, really. But again, the companies that do this well over a period of time, then they start to obviously reap the benefits.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's so tied to a feeling of safety, isn't it? I know that when I've worked with clients, I coach neurodivergent individuals, they always ask me, should I disclose or shouldn't I? And as you've just said, that whole process of ticking a box as to whether you're disabled or not, quite a lot of neurodivergent people don't identify with that label, actually. Although we might describe them as having hidden disabilities, and we've used a term earlier in the podcast around people being ableist. These are all relatively harsh, if you like, characteristics to identify, but a lot of employers are ableist and they probably wouldn't identify themselves as being so. So where does neurodiversity and disability sit well together and where doesn't it?
It's an interesting question, right? Because you probably know as well as me that in our community, and apologies, I don't have much data to back this up, there's definitely a feeling around identity first language and trying to move into the ownership around this being a natural variation of the way you think and etc. And I love that. And that's exactly where we need to be. The challenge is a lot of organisations, and obviously in terms of support, is built around the medical model still, right?
I know, yes, exactly.
There's a bit of a conflict there, but when we talk to organisations, what we try to do is to focus around adjustments, right? Not focus around this disclosure of neurotype. It's more of a case of, is there anything else we can do to help support you during the interview or application process? Please let us know. These are the type of things that we can offer. Questions in advance, extra time during the interview, virtual interviews for the first one, some supported document in terms of office maps, etc., this type of thing. If companies can start to focus on that, then I believe that job seekers will naturally start to disclose a lot more because they feel comfortable to do so at that point. But this idea of having this tick, if you're disabled, I've got loads of clients where they have that and nothing happens afterwards. It's maybe tracked in their applicant tracking system or the ATS, but it doesn't move the conversation forward, doesn't give anyone the support they need, etc. So again, I think it's really important that companies start to look at it from that perspective where it's quite open and the option for individuals to disclose and ask for adjustments is very, very clear. And that sounds really, particularly on their websites, right? Websites are like again, a massive blind spot.
There's some really useful insights for anyone who's a hiring manager or training or any of those areas that you mentioned that you talk to regularly, those roles. If somebody is relatively new to this, what is their first step, would you say, Mark? What's the first thing they might do?
I would always suggest awareness, understanding a little bit more about the history of neurodiversity, the concept of neurotypes or conditions, the idea of looking at neuro-inclusion and neurodiversity through a strength-based lens, but also appreciating the fact that individuals need adjustments and support. But there's some key concepts that I think are equally as important, like understanding masking, understanding disclosure, understanding equity versus equality, understanding the use of language and the evolving individual nature of language. All of these things create this foundation for then just go, okay, I'm starting to see where this community is coming from. I'm starting to understand the type of nuances around neuro-inclusion. Now start looking at how we can take action in our businesses. But it starts with this foundational part of awareness. And that's the area that, to me, just really starts to push the conversation forward. Because people are often surprised. You're saying that possibly 1 in 5 of our employees are neurodivergent.
Yeah.
I can't believe that over 70% of autistic individuals are unemployed. Are you telling me that we believe only 3% of our employees are neurodivergent? All of these things to take into account. So it's that awareness piece is key to starting.
Brilliant. And I suppose if you were to work with a new organisation, that would be where you'd start. You wouldn't want to put candidates in an environment that wasn't neuro-affirming in some way or on that journey.
Talking honestly, Kate, we would prefer to focus on certainly 3 areas before we start to send candidates anywhere. And that would be the awareness piece, recruitment training. So looking at your job specifications, application process, interview process and rejection management process, and then people manager training. So those areas. You
just said something that's just, I can't help but be triggered by rejection management process.
Yeah.
I think it's incredible that you've even said that, because I know of many organisations that don't even do anything around, sometimes just ghost people. If people have even been to, there is nothing around a process of. So tell me a little bit more about that. We're going to go down that rabbit hole right now.
No worries.
What, first of all, is a rejection management process? Because I think some organisations might learn a thing or two here.
Just to frame this conversation, I've worked in recruitment a long time, so I understand the challenges of getting thousands of applications in for one role. So when we're talking about rejection or rejection management process, particularly individual reasons for not hiring someone, most of the time we're talking about someone who's gone through an interview process, right?
Yeah.
The reason this is important is based around these employment statistics for the E&D community. You're already talking about a group there that are going through a lot of rejection on a day-to-day basis. The market's challenging at the moment when we're recording this. So you've already got that going on. And organisations should have a process where they collate feedback afterwards from all of the interviewers, they collate feedback from the candidate, and they make a decision based around skills, who was right for that job. If they do that, then it's very straightforward to give someone a reason why they've not hired them. There's two key challenges here. First thing is they'll always use the excuse of time. I've got to do this. It's going to take me a while. I've got to collate all this feedback, etc. But the bigger issue for me is that too many businesses are making decisions from a subjective nature, right, where it's not easily explainable and not easily demonstrable. You hear this phrase sometimes, I made a decision within the first 10 seconds that person walking in the room, or I made a decision in the lift on the way to the thing because they didn't shake my hand or some other nonsense, right? So it's all of this coming together is really important, because at the end of the process, you should be able to say to someone, and I love this, by the way, you performed in these areas really well. In this area, we just had a candidate who had slightly more experience in this particular skill, which we needed for this job. So we're going to hire that person. I've had so many job seekers come to me that are neurodivergent and said, I didn't get this job, but I love the experience.
Exactly.
It's fully supported. And that's all you need. And that's what you need to try and do. And you mentioned before this call, we were talking about RSD, or rejection sensitive dysphoria.
Yeah.
Again, it's incredibly impactful for a lot of our community.
Honestly, if organisations are listening to this particular part, this is not just neurodivergent individuals who would benefit from this. An organisation's brand, reputation is affected by this part of the process that is not considered most of the time. When I was on the inside hiring, I know it's not easy. I know it requires emotional maturity to have that conversation with somebody to say, I'm really sorry you weren't successful. Here's the reason why. But it is the most powerful thing you can do for somebody's development and sense of self. And it will never be forgotten. Sorry, I'm on a bit of a soapbox here, but there are people today who come back to me and go, Kate, I still remember that feedback you gave me in that process. And they value it immensely. So yes, keep doing that.
There's a couple of points on that, though, if that's okay.
Yeah.
The first one being that if I am recruiting directly for an organisation, right? So in my world, you call that a direct recruitment model, right? Where you don't use agencies, you are a recruiter just for IBM, right? For example. If you have a candidate who's a very close second, surely it's in your interest to keep in contact with that candidate in case you get another job going forward, right? It's by giving them a positive experience.
Totally.
The other challenge, though, and this is where, again, it reinforces the idea of recruitment agencies being a blind spot, is recruitment agencies, if they send a couple of candidates and their candidate doesn't get the job, they are so disengaged from that point onwards because there's no money in it for them at that point, right? There's almost a case of they've lost a deal, they've lost a placement, they've lost wherever it is. Not everyone, admittedly, but it is something that certainly in my experience, I used to see a lot of the time. So it's almost a case of why would I have to, now I've got to engage with this candidate, now I've got to tell them this, now I've got to go through the feedback, etc., etc. But good recruitment agencies or good recruitment professionals will do this, like you say, for everyone, because it helps build their reputation within the candidate community, regardless of neurotype.
Absolutely. And just keep on this little hobby horse that we're enjoying at the moment. Because I worked in HR, I would often be that candidate who had the awful experience, who then would get a job and be the person deciding which recruitment agency to work with. And you can bet the ones that I chose were the ones that had maintained that relationship.
Absolutely.
And treated the candidate with respect throughout the process.
Love it.
I'm sure there were other things you said around what organisations can do. You said there were three things. There was awareness, there's recruitment training. So was there something else as well?
Yeah, I think when someone is placed or someone starts at a role or onboarded, the person they report to directly is so important. We did a study last year based around the experiences of neurodivergent women in the workplace. And one of the common themes throughout the entire study was the direct relationship with the person they report to. Because that person has the power to give someone support, which maybe isn't in the manual or maybe isn't part of the existing HR policy. Let someone come in 15 minutes later. Let someone take a bit of time to decompress, all of these things.
We didn't want to know about those things in HR. That was called management discretion.
Absolutely. You're hiring these managers to make decisions, right?
Exactly.
To support their team.
Yeah.
To me, that is incredibly key. It really is. We mentioned all of these different groups within organisations like ED&I, HR, recruitment, etc. If they're not all joined up, then individuals that join at one point are going to start having, I'd say, a negative experience. So it's making sure that we look after these pillars from a training perspective.
Yeah. And you've just made a really important point. So Diversita is so much more than just getting somebody into a role. From what you've said, it's preparing the candidates, first of all. Everyone has unique candidates, but you particularly treat everybody as an individual with needs. And then you are helping the organisation be responsive to those and look for the skills. And then you're embedding that person in the organisation through an effective onboarding. So it's quite a detailed beginning and end, isn't it? That pipeline management that you're doing there.
It is. And one of the key things we've learned over the last 3 years is we have to invest time in both sides. So a lot of the time, being honest, Kate, we perhaps don't operate as a traditional recruitment agency. We have a digital platform now called Diversita Connect, where we've got nearly 50 webinars which give our candidates bespoke information around interview preparation, identifying neuro-inclusive companies, self-advocacy, self-promotion, all of these great areas. So our candidates and job seekers, whether they use us or not, hopefully feel more equipped to go into the job market. The flip side is that obviously we're trying to make sure that when they do get to companies that they have a positive experience. And that pincer movement on both sides is where we really believe we can make an impact. What we never want to be is an obstacle, right? And this is why a lot of the time we don't operate as a recruitment agency at the moment, because we believe a lot of organisations still may not want to use recruitment agencies or may not have the budget to do so. We don't want to stop our candidates getting jobs. So we can work with the direct sourcing team to train them up to be able to give neuro-inclusive processes for candidates and job seekers. But equally, the lack of bespoke, detailed, individual information for neurodivergent job seekers is really lacking. And we're really trying to change that at the moment as well.
That's brilliant. I got very excited about that. I'm listening to you thinking, I hadn't realised you've got those resources for anyone who feels they need to access better information around neurodiversity through the recruitment process. That's brilliant to hear that. Back to the managers and the influence they can have and the idea of senior leaders in the organisation supporting this. How influential are the skills of the manager in the success of the hiring and retention of a neurodivergent job seeker candidate?
Again, I suppose there's two key points here. It's a really good question. The first one is that the hiring manager or the manager they're going to be reporting to is often the person who makes the final decision as to whether they hire someone.
Okay, yeah.
So how they make that decision is important, right? And we talked about subjective requirements and trying to focus on skills. So it's making sure that individual who is essentially a gatekeeper to that organisation really understands neuro-inclusion and neurodiversity in the right way. The other key part is obviously how to manage and support someone on a day-to-day basis. And it may be that some individuals do need a slightly different working pattern. It may be that someone has a different communication style. It may be that someone needs to decompress to a quiet room or a quiet area for a while. All of these varies. And the important part there is to understand why and not just jump into, if I've got to do that for you, I've got to do it for Charlie. If I do that for you, I've got to do it for everyone else. It's thinking about equity rather than equality in these instances.
I was just about to ask you about that. How would you describe the difference between equity and equality? Because a lot of people get hung up over this. So how would you describe that in a way that simplifies that concept, but from a hiring recruitment point of view? That's a challenge.
No, do you know what? I've got an example which I will use and I use quite a lot in training.
Brilliant.
So when I started in recruitment in 2005, probably to around 2010, maybe 12, it was what I call handshake recruitment, right? I used to recruit for the big organisations, big banks. I used to go on a trading floor and everyone looked like me. My age now is 50, etc. So everyone looked like me. And then what happened, particularly around gender, there was a big focus on equality. Everyone had the same opportunity to apply for roles. The interview process was the same. Application processes were the same. People were hopefully being given a more equal way of applying and trying to join organisations. But it's now not fit for purpose, because what we find with the neurodivergent community in particular is individuals have different, not starting positions, but they need different platforms to showcase skills, right? So some individuals may need a little bit more time, for example, particularly individuals that are dyslexic, to digest information, digest questions, take an answer, and then give an answer. So giving someone extra time now is equitable, and it's moved into that, but it's not unfair, right? Because that individual needs that. right? They need to be able to take that to point in. If someone really struggles with eye contact during an online interview initially because it absolutely exhausts them turning the camera off is not giving someone an unfair advantage. It's giving someone an equitable platform or a different platform to showcase their skills, because you're taking away this challenge. So it's thinking about things slightly differently. And even when you talk about, and again, I don't want to teach people to suck eggs, but DEI now is diversity, equity and inclusion, not equality. People still use the wrong moniker around this. And it's thinking about it from that perspective. And I still, every day, we talk to managers who have a mindset which is focused around equality still. In their defence, they're just trying to be fair.
Exactly.
They just don't understand that sometimes you do need to be able to make adjustments for people to showcase those abilities.
And it is the criticism, isn't it? My experience of it from the HR side is it's not fair. And because they've had that, we all need to have that same accommodation. But that's when, for example, questions in advance doesn't make it more fair for somebody else. If you do give it to everyone, it just means that you have removed a challenge that one person is feeling or experiencing that doesn't have to be there. And it doesn't mean that they aren't capable of doing the job. It means what you've done is enabled them to do the job and showcase their ability to do that.
Absolutely.
There's me getting all very long-winded.
Love it. No, it's exactly right. And it's such an important point. It's always one of the key takeaways with companies. But again, HR, we talk to HR sometimes and they feel a little bit hamstrung by equality. So I get it.
It's the perception of it. It's what people think is fair and what they think is unfair. And it stops people sometimes from making what seems to be a courageous or brave decision. And in reality, it's a requirement. If we were to be really serious about legislation, it is a requirement of the law that people are given the adjustments they need to have that platform to showcase what they can do. So everything you're saying, it shouldn't be out of the ordinary, and yet somehow it still is.
But the day-to-day manager is probably not familiar with the equality and what's needed. But that's the HR's responsibility and the training responsibility to make sure they don't know it word for word, but they do know that if someone comes to you with an adjustment request and it is reasonable based around interpretation, that person's, like you say, manager's discretion, then they try their best to implement it. I think, in my experience, most of our community are very realistic around what they ask for. It's just the fact that a lot of the time it's just shut down at source. We can't do that. We're not going to do that. Are you having a laugh at you, etc. All of that type of thing. Just trying to move away from that.
What if somebody does face that? Not that I expect you to have the answer, but I'm curious. Do you find people coming to you as a job seeker and they've had that experience in the past? And so they are put off asking for anything because they've been shamed or discounted or rejected so many times that even the effort to ask, it isn't there. How do you deal with those sorts of situations?
I wish I brought up the point actually earlier on when you asked me about why companies are not attracting a lot of the time neurodivergent job seekers. It's because people have, when they have often made that decision to disclose. I read a statistic the other day, and forgive me, I can't remember where it's from, but I believe when someone discloses, it's around the 7th or 8th time they've gone to do it or made that decision to do it, and they finally do it, then they have a really negative experience. And from that point onwards, they don't ask for anything. Inevitably, productivity goes down. They don't feel supported. They're not happy at work. They may start taking time off sick because of the secondary mental health challenges around this, etc. And then suddenly it takes them a period of time to be able to get back into the workforce. When you mask at work as well, it can be exhausting, leading to burnout, particularly autistic burnout, which again means people will take long periods of time out of the workforce. But imagine this though, right? Imagine that you have done that. You get back on the horse, you go to apply for a role, you get into the interview, you're not getting adjustments, you're not getting any understanding, and the manager's not prepared, you don't get any equity during this process. Again, that knocks you off your feet for a while. And what's really interesting here, and I'm glad you brought it up, is everything we're talking about here is a lot of the time within businesses' controls and costs little to no money to try and help implement. And it could make such a difference. Such a difference.
It's that exhaustion and that tiredness that I think different neurotypes don't understand. Like you said, you talked about autistic burnout. That's different from another type of burnout, isn't it? Do you have experience of that, Mark? Is that something you'd be able to describe what autistic burnout is for anyone who's not familiar with that phrase?
It's again based around a lot of the time the challenge of masking over a long period of time in social settings, in work settings, educational settings, sometimes even family settings, where you can't bring the part of yourself to these scenarios that you want to. And it's exhausting because you're constantly putting on a role. You're constantly trying to hide areas. A job seeker recently who really to stim, right, and really like to use tangle toys and tangle devices and stuff like that, to particularly at home. But at work, they didn't feel safe to disclose. And they used to stim by relentlessly tapping their toe in their shoe to try and release that anxiety, etc. It's only so long before something breaks, right? I'm not an expert in autistic burnout at all, but this is the general feeling around it. And it's because people just can't bring a part of themselves. And what is heartbreaking for me is that a lot of the time when people are asking for adjustments, this will not solve every problem or every challenge someone has at work. It's just releasing the pressure valve a little bit so they can cope at work, right, in certain instances. So when that's shut down, suddenly you have individuals that are really going to struggle from that point onwards.
What I'm really struck with there is we're starting to hear phrases like neurobiology and it not being about just thinking differently. It's a nervous system. It's a whole body experience being neurodivergent. It's not just the brain. And I think what you've done is illustrate there how important it is that people are able to regulate themselves in their environment in healthy ways, and that masking is meaning that they have got recovery time they need to take maybe in the evening or at the weekends. And if you can create an environment in the workplace where people are able to regulate themselves or talk about what they need to regulate, that's going to be incredibly, I think, from an employer's point of view, unusual, but empowering. And you'll also ensure that you continue to get the skills and strengths that individual brings.
Totally. And last one is that if you're a manager and you have the opportunity to be able to give adjustments in these situations, it doesn't need to be you're either an empathetic manager or you're looking at it from a return on investment or productivity perspective. They don't need to be mutually exclusive. They can be interjoined in your decision making. They really can.
Yeah.
And I think that's really important, that if you support someone because you want to make sure someone has a really positive experience at work, by proxy, they'll be a lot more productive going forward. I think
completely.
And bring that bigger part of themselves to work. But my final point, only because someone I know, if someone listens to this, who I spoke to the other day, they'll bring it up, is they said that unmasking can also be quite exhausting. And so managers will sometimes need to help people learn to unmask, because when you've masked for a long time, trying to then think, okay, what do I want to bring to work now? Most of the team know I'm autistic or neurodivergent. What is my comfort level around that as well? So I think it's quite an important point.
It's a massively important point. From a coaching perspective, this is often what I'm helping people with in the workplace is, do they understand that they're masking? What does unmasking mean? Do they still need to do certain things to feel safe? It all comes back to that feeling of safety as well. And as we've just touched on this idea of coaching, do you see a role for coaching on the employer side, or for hiring managers or people working with neurodivergent talent? How does coaching feed into this? Do
you mean as in an independent coach working with someone after they start a role? Or?
That would be one area. And just generally, how can coaching help?
I think allocating structured time to individuals when they start, if you're a manager, is really important, be it one-to-ones, be it performance reviews, be it any opportunity to have these touch points that are consistent and where the expectation on those conversations is really open, or the agendas around those. I love independent coaches, which you can obviously get through sometimes through access to work, particularly if someone is relatively new to work and has disclosed they're neurodivergent. Just being able to have someone that they can say, look, I was meant to have a one-to-one this week and my manager didn't turn up, or I keep getting asked to use the photocopier and no one showed me how to use it, or I've got someone recently said something in the break room that I didn't like and I don't know what to do with it. Is having someone who's a natural mediator to be able to give advice to, or there's a particular scenario I need some advice on. I love that. If you look at someone like Auticon, who recruit only autistic technologists based in Edinburgh, they allocate job coaches to all of their individuals or consultants that they place because they've realised the importance of that continued support. And sometimes it's emotional support and empathetic support.
Brilliant. And those coaches, can they be, from your experience, internal or external or both or either?
A bit of both. I suppose my preference or suggestion is that they're quite independent, so they can represent the individual in the right way. So there's a slight disconnect with the organisation. That said, organisations tend to support neurodivergent employees in different ways. I love employee resource groups, for example, organisation where you have this sense of community, where you can meet, someone used the phrase, your neurokin, and talk about things in quite an open, safe space. What I love about those groups is they can also influence change and policy, etc. So you're receiving the coaching, but you also feel ingrained in trying to make this a more positive experience for every neurodivergent individual that joins your organisation. But of course, managers can coach as well. I think it just needs to be, there needs to be a certain demarcation around time and expectations in those calls.
Thank you. I was interested in exploring that, as I know quite a few of our listeners are going to be in that coaching space and want to hear what roles could be available or could help neurodivergent people during this process.
The only reason I wanted to just follow up on your point there around the audience in particular is that in the UK, there's a new programme called Connect to Work, which the government have introduced based around, I think it's a wider initiative called Get Britain Working. And most local authorities are being targeted to trying to help more neurodivergent and disabled individuals to get back into work. Part of that structure, and the local authorities are being given quite a lot of autonomy around this, is the support going forward for individuals through either supported internships, coaching, support during employment. It's not just about getting people into work, it's keeping people in work, and coaching plays a really key part in that. So I would suggest anyone who's a coach starts looking into Connect to Work, because it's one of those areas that I think will start to have a lot of impact over the next few years.
Thanks for that, Mark. Thinking about what the future holds, what do you hope for the impact that Diversita has? What kind of legacy would you like to leave?
I've never, although I know I quote a lot of different pieces of data, but I'm not particularly data-led on a day-to-day basis in the way we work.
I love how you brought all the stats in, though, honestly. I think that's been brilliant. Thank you for that.
That's all right. I suppose at the moment, our ethos, when we started, it was very much around, we're going to be a recruitment agency to represent the neurodivergent community. I would say we're now an organisation that represents our neurodivergent community and helps organisations to become more neuro-inclusive. And I think being part of something that indirectly or directly helps more neurodivergent individuals get into employment, stay in employment and have really productive careers, if we can do that, I'd be so pleased. Now, that may be that we train a couple of managers up at a small company down on the Kent coast. It might be that we help one massive company in London hire 20 people. Right? It could be anything, but anything that moves that conversation forward. But I also love the idea, and we've got, and again, I'm not trying to just promote our platform, but by this new digital platform we have, people can ask us questions any time of day and we'll come back to them within 24 hours, right? About, I've got an interview tomorrow. Should I disclose to this organisation? I've got this job specification. There's a few things that I'm not sure about. Should I apply? It's that type of advice that I think is missing.
It is.
Even when I look at some of the bigger initiatives at the moment that are being sponsored by government, they're very holistic, they're very strategic, they're looking at wider impacts and systemic change. What about the young individual who wants to apply for a role today and get a job? What do they do? Who do they go to for help? And that's the legacy I'd like to have, that we were driven by action, we were driven by making sure we had change, and everyone who approached us had some level of help. We're never going to please everyone, right? And it's impossible to do so in what we do. But I'd like to think that people will come away thinking, you know what, at least they're trying to help that community.
Oh, that's brilliant. I think that's incredible. And for anybody who wants to get in touch with you, Mark, how can they do that? Where can they find you?
So they can email me directly on mcrawley@diversita.co.uk. We've got a very nice website that my oldest son built, which
Fabulous.
is www.diversita.co.uk. So again, you can contact us through that. So yeah, either of those are absolutely fine. And I'll make sure I come back to any queries or questions or anything like that.
And I can say that you and I met on LinkedIn, so I imagine you also can connect to people there as well.
Absolutely. Yeah, feel free. It's connection requests all day long. Love it.
All day long. That's how we met. So is there any final thing that you'd like to add?
Again, it depends who will listen to this. If you're a neurodivergent job seeker, I would definitely reach out if you're looking for a little bit of support or advice. And look, we have our digital platform. We charge a very small subscription fee, but if you can't afford it, we give it to you for 3 months. Have a look at it, see what you can do, and it'll give you some advice, it'll give you some help, and you'll come away in a better place in applying for jobs going forward. If you're a company and you don't know where to start, come and have a conversation with us, right? You can see we're very clear, very no fluff, and we try to move that conversation forward. But I think ultimately this is really about trying to help people get into work, feel valued, feel supported. Not every neurodivergent individual is going to want to work, right? I understand that. I will feel in the place to do. But when they are, I really want people to have that experience where they, at the very least, have a positive engagement with the companies they apply for. So I suppose that's my parting message.
I love that. I totally endorse that. From my experience of working in HR, that's the thing that can have the biggest impact. It's been an absolute pleasure to speak to you today, Mark. I know always when we have these conversations, I learn so much. So I want to thank you and hope that we get the chance to talk again about this as things change frequently in our community, like you say. Let's stay in touch. But thank you for being here today.
No, thank you so much. Really enjoyed it. And you're doing some great work. So thank you.
Cheers. Thank you for listening to another podcast by the Association for Coaching. For over 20 years, our purpose has been to inspire and champion coaching excellence, advance the coaching profession, and make a sustainable difference to individuals, organisations, and society. To find out more about the AC and our member benefits, follow us on LinkedIn or visit our webpage at associationforcoaching.com. where you can explore our digital learning hub and enjoy our extensive library of on-demand webinars, podcasts, and a portfolio of live events featuring thought leadership tools, models, and the very latest industry trends to help you develop your coaching expertise.